Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last 3 years, I've interviewed over 250 people around this question, not to prescribe you with the universal answer, but to help you explore this question for yourself. I'm hoping the guests' musings, curiosities, anecdotes, and experiences will prompt your own inquiry into what this question means for you. While I'm also trying to share with you what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience and indeed more meaningful conversations. Which brings us to this week and the 103rd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. And I'm delighted to introduce our guest, Nathan Kinch. Nate is a sociotechnology ethicist, organisational designer, and trust researcher. His work centres around the question, how might we design trustworthy organisations, technologies, and systems that support a dignified and healthy life for all, within planetary boundaries? To do this, he draws on many branches of philosophy, systems science, cognitive sciences, and related disciplines. He is a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts, co-lead of the Responsible AI Network, and lead of Ethics and Action. He is also the ethicist in residence at CoLabs and guest lectures at several universities. Previously, Nate was an angel and impact investor and the founding CEO of a venture capital-backed startup. In everyday life, he's an urban rewilder, community convener, and inner developer, bringing regenerative thinking, practice, and culture to his corner of Melbourne. In this wonderful conversation, Nate shares with us his exploration of expressing and feeling into the whole of who he is. We discuss realizations he made through his psychophysical inquiries, from suppressing emotions to crumbling worldviews, to the relief and healing of crying, and expressing and experiencing more joy and gratitude in life. For anyone on their own path of self-inquiry, this conversation includes many universal themes that I sense that we all experience, which may make you feel more at home on your own path. While Nate's beautiful anecdotes, transparency, and reflections make this as grounded and heartfelt as it is insightful. Look, I enjoyed this conversation hugely and took away a few new realizations from it myself. And I definitely feel like it touches on a few key cornerstones and really important parts of our own self-inquiries. So I suspect you're going to take a lot from it as well. And if you enjoy this episode, please like, share, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on the podcasting platforms, please continue to leave your lovely reviews, as it's greatly appreciated. Please check out the show notes below to follow more of Nate's work. And you can also find a link to the podcast newsletter where you can read about the reflections that these conversations that you are listening to are evoking in me, as well as ways for finding out more about my work, whether that's for individual one-on-one coaching around your own self-inquiry, joining my recently announced silent conversation courses, as well as for ways to help your leadership team develop greater trust, meaning, and human connection. And I'll finish off, obviously, by wishing you all a very happy, prosperous, healthy new year, where you get to sense an alignment with what is a good life for you. So that's all I have to say for this week. I look forward to carrying on the conversation with you next week and next year. Thanks for all the support this year. It's greatly appreciated. And so without further ado, the 103rd episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. Nate, thank you so much for joining me today on the What is a Good Life podcast. Since our last conversation and just our little prelude there as well, I'm very looking forward to seeing where this conversation goes today.
Mate, likewise, it's a real privilege to be here.
So as you're well aware, the first question I start with is there a question you're exploring as you move through life?
What does it mean to live a good life? I think this. I'm riddled with questions, mate. I'm riddled with questions, but I think there are some big meta questions that are really captivating to me, and very sort of alive. Like I'm in the process of trying to live in relation to them, and I suppose the one perhaps that feels most relevant right now is something like, what is the whole of me, and how can I best balance, integrate, and thoughtfully express that in alignment to my values, in alignment to the way that I would most like to be in this world, in the various different roles, that I have: dad and partner and neighbor and community member and son and brother and all that stuff. Probably something like that at the moment. Yeah.
Do you know, well, I've heard a lot of those words used separately before. I've never heard it put like, what is the whole of me? When you said that there, it resonated or spoke to something deeply in me. How would you kind of
Mm.
expand upon your exploration of that question?
So I feel like, so I'm in my sort of mid-ish 30s now, and early to mid 30s now, and I feel like at different stages or phases of life, I've kind of like assumed certain identities, or I've become intimately identified with particular frames of who I am or stories about myself. Um, and I think for a good chunk of the first 30 years, and there's real nuance to this, but a good chunk of the first 30 years or so, I think a lot of that storying, like a lot of the stuff that was really driving who I was based on the way that I kind of developed as a minded animal cultured person in relation to my world, my environment. And so I think there was a lot of subconscious stuff going on that I was deeply unaware of. And it led to a lot of really significant challenges in my life and health issues and suffering, I suppose. Really, I can laugh about it now, but really intense suffering. And as I started to learn about that, I began to realize, like, hey, I'm not necessarily equal to these things. There's more to me than this. What is that more? And I started learning how to sort of play curiously with that exploration. Now, I don't always do that. Sometimes I put too much pressure on myself, and um, I probably like want it to be done. I just want to be. I want you know what I mean. It's like I want to be healed, or and so there's definitely that energy at
Yeah, yeah.
times. But so, yeah, so I think it's something like that. As I've learned about these different ways that I've expressed myself, and the fact that I probably was doing so with less agency than is ideal, I've started to relate to myself in different ways and realize, oh gosh, all of these parts, all of these expressions, they are me, but I'm not just that. That, you know, in sort of formal parlance, like those parts aren't like the necessary and sufficient condition that makes me me. They're parts, and I I I can actually figure out how to kind of like direct them. Maybe not in all ways at all times. Um, and so that, and for folks that are familiar with something like an IFS, like an internal family systems, this might sound a little bit like that. I'm not sure if that's exactly how I relate to it, or if it's just one of many ways I relate to it. But it's something like that. Like um, I'm seeing these things that maybe I really disliked about myself, or I wouldn't admit. I just didn't want to admit. I'd sort of bury my head in the sand and not even realize I was doing it. Like go, that part's okay. And actually, that part could be helpful if we redirect it. Um, and something like the togetherness of all of this, combined with the way that whatever the higher order me is, and maybe we just think of this as like the self-narrating ego in this particular case, is able to steward that holding process. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm not sure I've ever been asked to put it
Oh,
into words, but um,
yeah, yeah, but
yeah.
this is making absolute sense to me, which doesn't necessarily mean that it makes sense. But it's
Yeah.
you said something you said something there which that part is okay. When you said that,
Mm,
that honestly gave me goosebumps, and I think it speaks to probably my own journey in or my own path in initially trying to disavow things or reject things or not acknowledge parts of myself. But you said something that I hadn't actually considered before, which was it's not almost in rejecting those bits, it's like those different parts, because as you say, that they, in whatever we can categorize, it will never even come close to capturing the whole. So it's almost like in acknowledging more and more of ourselves that we get into some sort of sense of the whole. And then these other things that we're rejecting so fiercely, that we're judging ourselves so much for, that we may be holding so much shame for, the more we can hold of the totality, the more we can kind of get an orientation or an appreciation that, okay, I may not like this on the face of it right now, but it is just a fragment of me. Or as you say, I may just be looking at this in a really unhelpful way. And it may actually
Mm.
have serve some use if I don't just reject it right off the bat, kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes, like so much that. Maybe can I give you a recent example? Like it's very, it's
Yeah,
alive
please.
and in process right now. That might. All right, so I've been meaning to. Have you ever heard of Bill Plotkin? Does that name ring a bell?
It does indeed, yeah.
So for everyone listening, Bill is an eco depth psychologist, and he does some really fascinating work. And he's certainly building on the shoulders of giants that have come before him, eco philosophers and depth psychologists, and just some amazing people. And I've been listening to one of his books lately. I think it might have been on Nate Hagen's uh, podcast a little while back. He had Bill, and I was like, yeah, I've been meaning to get into this work. And like everyone else, probably like the list of what I want to read or what I want to engage with versus what I can is like, I've come to accept I'm never going to be able to interface with all the stuff I want to, right? And that's cool. But so I was going through his 8-stage soul centered uh, like human development process and learning about the way that he frames that and the way that he has worked for 50 odd years to learn how to express that and enact that and support others in relating to that and sort of cultivating their own soul-centered like development. And maybe about a third of the way through the book, it's a big book, it's 550 odd pages, he started talking about one of the sort of archetypes that can develop in childhood, sort of in response to difficult circumstances. And he referred to it as the soldier archetype. And the basic, and I'd never quite heard it framed this way. And it really landed because the basic idea is that this part of you emerges, if you will. And it's the subconscious, right? You're not doing this consciously as a 5-year-old or whatever. This part of you emerges to protect you. And it sort of has the qualities that we might expect of a soldier. And he used the example from World War II. You know how some of the Japanese soldiers got stranded on different islands, and some of them were gone for 30 years, but they, what kept them alive was like the mission, the empire, the values that they were attempting to enact as soldiers in defense of their country and their culture and whatnot. And then he described how the Japanese, even though there was a huge mismatch between what those folks who had been lost for 30 odd years valued and where the culture was at that present time, the way that they integrated them. And I started thinking about and I've done a lot of work on this, mate. I got to admit, I've been really fortunate to be able to spend like a lot of deep quality time on myself over the last few years. Which is, before we started recording, that painful process of becoming I was describing. You know, it's painful, joyful, pain, right? But that developmental process. And so describe the way that these folks were integrated into society. So they weren't shamed or anything like this. They were accepted and embraced. People expressed gratitude for what they had done and the fact that they had stuck it out. And they found ways, perhaps not in all cases, of course, but to redirect the kind of spirit that those people were embodying usefully into the society that was today. And so I started thinking about that. I was like, oh my, this is one of the best ways I've ever heard, like verbal frames of aspects of myself that I know developed in somewhere between, you know, or we're developing between sort of maybe 5 and 15, 16 or so. That actually were part of giving rise to a lot of like psychophysiological sort of struggles that I was having. And I was like, oh my gosh, like I can speak in an IFS sort of way. I can speak to this part of myself. And I refer to this part as Soldier Nathan. And I started expressing respect and gratitude for all that part of me had done to protect me in some challenging circumstances that I wasn't developmentally ready to healthily interface with, and realize that, oh my gosh, the sort of abilities of that Soldier Nathan archetype are incredible. I now just have to figure out how to direct that, and I could go into a huge amount of depth as to what issues that cause and stuff like that, but that was the basic process. And so I've been trying to do that in different ways over the last few years through lots of different practices, much more sort of traditional and esoteric psychedelic type rituals through to more modern approaches to, say, clinical psychotherapy. And I've really tried to embrace a number of them, and I've benefited from them all in different and I think complementary ways. They've never really been contradictory. They've really been complementary. But that's sort of what I mean. So instead of going, fuck you, you caused all of this, and then for almost 15 years after you did your job, I've suffered. Like, get out of my life. It was kind of like, I didn't know, I didn't realize, and you did help me profoundly. And yes, the kind of like how you emerged and the capabilities you had and the things that you did to help me did become harmful. They were adaptive and they became maladaptive, right? But now that I know this and I'm okay now, I can invite you into the whole that is me. And so it's like I'm building my own community or ecology, and that ecology, the whole of the ecology, you know, because the parts coming together, and then that those parts coming together, that relationship is like synergy, and what arises out of those relations is like emergence. Like that emergence is almost like me. Does that help?
Yeah. Nate, completely. Like you're saying lots of deeply resonant things. The idea of the soldier archetype was another thing that literally gave me goosebumps, in the sense of the moment I heard that, I almost thought of society in a slightly sad sense of us kind of marching and about our days, maybe with the armor or a weapon slung over our shoulder, kind of still in that mode, kind of halting or impeding our capacity to see each other as humans. And I can fully relate to the process that you're talking about too, of anger was a default for me for a long time, to not to face pain or sadness. And initially probably scolding myself twice then, because whatever the arm or the anger developed for to protect myself from was one thing, but then I start judging or shaming myself for the anger too. So kind of this perpetual cycle of anger against anger, and you don't have to be a genius to figure out that that probably won't go anywhere or relieve anything or integrate anything, So it's and as you say, I can understand why you're so taken with it, because the idea then of kind of welcoming that, and is, as you mentioned with this analogy with the Japanese soldiers, and then how do we deploy that in a way, or in our overall ecology, that makes us a full whole human, which can express all of these things in a healthy way, like, or in a way that at least leads to some better outcomes for ourselves, or as you were saying, like in the various roles that we play.
Mm.
But it's so fascinating, like this, I don't know, this process that so many of us seem to be on, or in going through, or in becoming. And just even when you mention there, just the fortune that you have to be exploring this, or to have the space for it over the last couple of years. Can you give me a sense of the sheer joy and gratitude for it, and the frustration that sometimes accompanies it as well?
Yeah. Um, can I give maybe a little bit of context first? I think that will be helpful.
You go wherever you want, man. Yeah.
So like, okay, so in 2022, right, I was, it's going to sound bad, but I promise it's a happy story now, kind of, right? So I was diagnosed with long COVID, right? And from when I was first sort of diagnosed to when I was better was almost a year. Um, the thing was, uh, that ended up being something like the crescendo uh, of a bunch of psychophysiological things that I'd been grappling with for at least 20 years. So stuff that was never explained through clinical investigation, or even through the paradigm of the biomedical model. Um, I ended up learning, very thankfully, that I would just want to be careful about how I say this, mate. So it seems that many people that are suffering from what is called long COVID don't seem to have any underlying, like, biomedically identifiable pathology. And so some uh, researchers, scholars, clinicians, theorists, etc., started hypothesizing that at least, and I'm not saying for everyone, but at least a reasonable proportion of these folks who had these symptoms were suffering like a psychophysiological disorder. Um, Explaining what gives rise to a psychophysiological disorder is a little bit challenging, and I won't do that because it'd take like maybe 20 minutes to do a decent job. But the higher level causality seems to be a little bit simpler to explain. Basically, um, your your brain and its sort of capacity for prediction starts making mistakes. So I'll give you a really simple, for instance. So when if I were to bang my leg really hard on something in front of me, um, there's this sort of multifactorial signaling process, right? And so technically, the brain central nervous system sort of like signals pain, the sensation of pain. And that works a way that we think we understand pretty well. But for various different reasons, sometimes that signal of pain can be sent even when you haven't banged your leg. And so it was hypothesized that I was suffering from that type of thing. Just, it was a bit more complex because there's lots of different symptoms, and the environmental context was really complex, and my history was quite complex and littered with stuff a bit like this that we hadn't been able to explain. I then ended up connecting with researchers at Harvard Medical School who'd already run a study for these types of patients with really excellent results. And I started engaging in their protocol, and I'm better 3 weeks later. Right. So my initial, and that's because I basically, I'm just going to use this colloquially for now, rewired my brain. Like dampen the fear, the brain stopped making the mistakes, the symptoms went away. What I realized during that process was, because I was doing basically an approach that's sometimes called pain reprocessing therapy, which has a number of different features. It helps you understand how pain works, particularly these types of, and pain in this case can just mean sort of symptoms, basically any symptom. But it often is actual pain, like, chronic neck pain or back pain or hip pain or whatever, or migraines, jaw pain. Like, it's crazy the amount of stuff that people have when you learn about these things. You gather evidence to rigorously establish that this is likely what's going on. You don't want to assume that this is what's going on if there is an underlying physiological cause, because that could be dangerous to assume. So you go through a rigorous clinical process. And I was very fortunate. I was in we have some great hospitals here in Melbourne, and I was in the long COVID program at the Melbourne hospital. So we'd done really rigorous investigation after investigation after investigation. And it was always like, you're perfectly healthy, which was baffling for all of the passionate, smart, yet burnt out clinicians that I was, that I was being cared for by. Then you start engaging in a few different practices to dampen the fear response, learn how to be with the sensations or the symptoms without adding more fear into the equation. You are encouraged to do additional sort of deeper work on your history, potential traumas, stresses that you're facing, et cetera, et cetera. And you're encouraged to, like this, I'm describing a protocol that's actually quite robust, but the simple 5 stages. And then you're encouraged to sort of just like get back to the joy of life, knowing that even though you're having some of these sensations or symptoms, you're actually okay. You're not actually in danger. And when I was doing the deeper part of that work, I realized, oh my God, I've been suppressing so much stuff. Like this hyper rationality type of thing that I've been embodying for most of my life. That was a coping mechanism. And so I didn't do the anger thing. I was the opposite. I suppressed a lot of anger when I should have been angry. I suppressed a lot of sadness when I should have been sad. And I started even remembering stuff that I'd, forgotten, that had happened earlier in my life. And I even, through this I suppose, a particular psychotherapy protocol, had uncovered like what was my first childhood memory, which was immensely traumatic, not because my parents had done anything bad to me. It was actually in a medical situation. So that started this process of, oh my gosh, I have all this shit that I just did not know was there, that I've been running from or hiding from or whatever it is. And so even that just starting that process and getting better, as in feeling physiologically fine, exercising like crazy, playing with my daughter, all the things that I wanted to be able to do with someone that physiologically tested the way that I should be able to. Like it was like, it shattered my worldview as well. Like it was almost metaphysical. It changed the way that I saw the world, and it started opening me up. I'm an ethicist professionally, and I try to be quite open in my curiosity, inquiry, etc. But actually, I was pretty close-minded to a lot of stuff back then. Pretty close, and I wasn't quite like in the scientism camp all the way, but I was kind of there. And so that opened, and I was profoundly grateful for that. But since then, it's just been this continued living process. And sometimes I'm crying profusely. Sometimes I'm expressing anger, but in a safe way, in a way that I know isn't affecting others. sometimes I'm just sitting with shit that makes me feel really uneasy, and I'm engaging. And there are different ways that you can do this, like curiosity, acceptance, loving, compassion, motivation towards valued states. That's called the calm method. There are a number of different approaches, um, and learning to sort of. I actually learned to feel again. I learned to feel again. I'd. It's not. Shouldn't say. It's not like I turned into a literal robot, um, but I was so disconnected from the authenticity of my my primate heart, to put it sort of that way, my feelings. um I've learned to feel again. Like yesterday I had these beautiful experiences with my partner. We're sitting on the rooftop and we're just like crying together, and like it comes so easy now. And it may I so sometimes it's hard, sometimes I get frustrated, sometimes I'm like, why am I just not better? um and then sometimes I'm hard on myself that I'm doing that, because I know that's not actually helpful. But then I'm able to reasonably quickly sort of come back to it and go, oh, even that was okay. And isn't it beautiful that I can cry, scream, shout, dance, sing, and like experience something closer to the fullness that is the potential of me. Um, yeah.
It's kind of remarkable, isn't it? How I don't like just this feeling thing. Like I was 31, or yeah, I think I was 31 when I saw a therapist, and I remember our very first engagement, or our very first session. And she, I'd started reading some books, so I was full of theories. And she asked me once, "How do you feel?" And I gave her a theory. She asked me twice, "How do you feel?" No, I said, "How do you feel?" I gave her a theory. And then she asked me a third time. And then she wouldn't ask me a fourth time. She goes, "No, like, are you happy? Are you sad? Are you whatever?" And it just dawned on me, like, as elaborate as my answers were, and I didn't mean this in a self-deprecating way or a punishing way, but if she asked me a question as a 31-year-old, that if she'd asked most 5-year-olds or 7-year-olds, that they probably would have been able to answer pretty quickly. And I don't know, there's something staggering to the idea that we could ever feel whole and yet be shut off to our feelings. How have you? How did you kind of come back into contact with these? I know the process you're saying, but I'm just saying, how did it even feel
Mm.
to start feeling again? There's clever ways
Conf-
to ask that, but that's it.
yeah. How did it feel to start feeling again? Yeah, that's a good one. It took time. So one of the things I was doing, because the folks that I was working with at Harvard, led by really incredible researcher and ER doctor Mike Donino. Shout out to those folks. They're incredibly generous. Like me over here in Australia, and they're helping me because they just want to help. And Mike's also doing another full-time job whilst leading biomedical studies. And Patricia, who was like, it's just, yeah. So I'm also immensely grateful for just the people. But mate, it took some time. So one of the things that I was doing was a particular like expressive writing protocol. And that worked really well for me. It doesn't work for everyone, but it worked really well for me because I like language and I like expressing myself verbally. And at different stages in my life, I've been quite a prolific writer and find it useful in so many different ways. So I was able to use a sort of modality that I was comfortable with to then start engaging in a process or practice that I was deeply uncomfortable with. And it just took time. At the start, it was just words. And if you read it, the words would probably read to you the same as it did 2 or 3 weeks later. But my direct experience as I was writing was so different from, say, week 1 to week 3. And has continued now, more than a couple of years later. But how did it feel to start? You know what? I fucking love crying. I used to fear crying.
Yeah.
I love crying now. Now, I'm not saying I'm looking to go out crying all the time, but fuck, I cry quite a lot. And it almost always feels amazing. So it's like the thing that I was fearing was a fundamental, almost like right of my being in this world. It was like something that was there for me to access and experience. And even if it was temporarily difficult, on the whole, it made things fundamentally better. And it was healing and cathartic and interesting and something I would learn from. So I don't know, it was really confronting. It took time. At the start, it was just words. It was just expressions. And then it started, like I started feeling it, I would shake or I would cry or I'd tense up. And I started becoming sort of like physiologically aware of the emotions and the relation between mental behavior or mental process and my physiology. And now it feels, not always, but often, quite congruent. It's like okay, so can I, like, these things are exciting to me now, right? If you asked me this 5 years ago, would you be having this sort of conversation? I would have been like, what are you talking about? Come on. But so, okay, so what I learned about myself was that for various different reasons, for a lot of my life, I was fighting myself. And the reason that I ended up having, like, the deeper cause of my psychophysiological symptoms was the fight between mind and body. And a lot of that was the soldier, because the soldier didn't have a way to productively express its energy. And I'm trying to view it more as a dance now. And in a dance, you might misstep, you might fall over, you might break your ankle, you might feel awkward, your partner might reject you. There's all different types of things that can happen in a dance. But it's a totally different frame. I'm not fighting anymore. Like, I'm flowing. Not always. I am a very long way from perfection, right? But so it feels like there's more of a mind-body dance than there ever has been, than I can ever recall. And sometimes I feel like the body falls over, or the mind falls over, or they fall over together, or other times it's really beautiful. You know what I mean? It's something like that. I've gone from, so that the soldier develops in order to protect from the fight outside of you. But then the fight outside of me was gone. I left home and stuff like that. I had an adult life. And so the fight came in here. I was fighting in here. And then I began to progressively wake up to that. And I think I'm in this stage now, like this phase of my life is about learning how to dance. And I take that very literally at times as well. I wrote a piece recently, like, music as a microcosm of life. And it was about this. I got to see Herbie Hancock recently, the jazz legend, and had a beautiful night afterwards. Got to go visit a corroboree tree, and it's a very special place to First Nations people in St Kilda here in Melbourne. Got to go out and watch a friend DJ played this amazing set, and then watch the sunrise, with my partner on the rooftop. Like, so I'm sort of like, there's actually some literal expression of that dance now, but a lot of it is, more, yeah.
Yeah, but that's I fully resonates with me, the sense of the literal dance as well of life. Like, I think there's for me, if I think over the 9 years or so that I've been with my wife now, like, the amount of just dance that has been involved in our home. Do you know what I mean? Whereas before, like, I'm just your classic Irishman that needs 10 points to even tap his foot on the ground. Do you know what I mean? And then a few more before he ventures out onto the dance floor. Like, so there is something like I think there's something lovely in this conversation of the kind of, I don't want to say deadening, but just the the shell that we keep contain life in, and then that we're almost riling against internally, because we've almost trapped ourselves within it. We can't feel, we can't express. And I'm not saying this is a reflection of you here. I just mean in general that I see so much with so
Yeah.
many of the conversations I have. And then I love this point you point to as well, like the fighting of ourselves, like we're incongruent internally. Like it's like there's an internal struggle in our almost body and our mind going on. And I'm sure lots of people, even when they're well into their meditation practices, therapies, many of these things, can still appreciate like a battle almost, that it can feel like going on in terms of their mind sometimes. But once again there's this like really lovely thing you said around the words on the page would have maybe looked the same, but that have a completely different resonance now, and that have a completely different like feeling to it. So I don't know, that just spoke again really strongly to me, almost between the dissonance between the projection of our lives and the feeling of our lives. And sometimes we get so hung up on the wording, and we trip each other up. Well, no, you said that, but they're just some form of expression. It's also what's behind them. It's what's felt, and I think that's kind of a really nice kind of metaphor for, I think, how a lot of people are experiencing their lives. You also said something that I think is really interesting. Obviously, very, very like not all the way over in. Was it the term you used? Scientism? I hadn't heard that before. Is that what you said? Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost where you're like
Um,
dogmatic about science. Yeah.
No. I understood. I just wanted to make sure that was the right word.
Yeah.
But what was that like then? Because I think this is a phase that a lot of people struggle with in some way. Like, because there's huge freedom that comes from not looking at life another way. But then and I've spoken to people obviously at all ages, so 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, where this inevitable worldview almost crumbles, shatters, breaks into fragments, whatever. And then we have to go again. Like, I don't know when the next one's coming for me, but maybe it'll be soon enough.
Yeah, tonight. Yeah.
Like what? Yeah. What's that experience been like for you?
I I feel it's overall been rather liberating, because in a sort of, in the Wittgensteinian limits of my language mean the limits of my world type of thing, the limits of my belief mean the limits of my world, the limits of what I can experience, that type of thing. The limits of our stories become the limits of our possibility space, like all that kind of jazz. It's quite freeing, like confronting at different points, but quite liberating and freeing, because and don't get me wrong, I'm still grappling with it in different ways. Like, I had this experience yesterday in the car with my partner where we were listening to a book, an audio book, coming back from the beach, and we had a really beautiful time sort of at the beach in the late evening after she'd finished work, and I was tensing up, right? Like, I was tensing up. And I think the contents of the book and the delivery, the verbal delivery from the author, was just a trigger. Like, I think it turned out, I think I had some frustration with world and life and stuff that I hadn't actually healthily expressed, right? But she felt it. She's sort of very shamanic, um, incredibly energy aware, and has experiences that are hard to explain. But anyway, so she felt it, right? And then sort of like like confronted me about it, not in a rude, like in a trying to figure out what was going on. And it was an interesting experience because yes, I realized later that I think I hadn't really like released the pressure valve for a while. And guess what? With the work that I do and the things that I pay attention to, the trajectory that we're on, being a parent, and looking at the trajectory that we're on, like there's a lot of reasons to be not just frustrated but fucking angry right now. And actually, I wrote about this recently, like the usefulness of both sadness and anger, and their important differences, and which context in which they might be most generally useful. But so I kind of hadn't done that, but the specific, like the tipping point, the thing that led to the spilling over the edge. And I don't. It's not like a lash out. It was just like it was a tension and energy, and I was critiquing what he was saying, rather than really sitting back and just taking it in, even if So and then there was tension within me because I'm like, oh, but I've made so much progress. I want to be able to do that, even if I really disagree, even if he's making incredibly confident claims that he has no ability to back up. I don't have to respond this. And so she's incredible, like helped me, coach me through that and support me. And we have these just such beautiful experiences together, helping each other grow and providing a mirror for one another and helping each other see our developmental trajectories better, helping each other see our potential better. You know what I mean? But like, yeah, but it was really confronting because, there's a part of me that's always almost disappointed in like, now I still disagree with what he said, and I don't believe he should be saying those things so confidently. I just don't think he had the, I'm going to use evidence, but use it reasonably broadly here to suggest and make such generalizable claims, right? But the response was almost felt like old me a little bit, and it's really interesting because, but then it's funny because even the language, right, old me, it's like, but these are still parts of me, right, and they come out in different ways. I don't know, so there's these experiences like that happen, like I'd say semi frequently, that. And then we were having a giggle about it later, and it's like some things I learn like this. My accuracy of recall and stuff like that is just crazy. Like I don't think I don't have a photographic memory, but it's without actually having a photographic memory, it's not that far off. But other stuff, I feel like I'm learning. I have to learn the same lesson like 1,000 times.
Yeah.
I don't know where I wanted to go with that, but I don't know. That just felt like, yeah.
No, it touches on something I think really important as well, though. The sense of the old me. Like I think this is something in general that I find a bit, and so I really like the observation you made as well, that it's still part of me, because I think there's too much of a rush, and I can say this just from my own experience. I don't need to project onto any other people, but there's almost too much of a rush to disavow what I am or what I've been, and then it almost then ends up becoming this, the perfectionism we chased in a former life and now becomes a perfectionism around being. It becomes a perfectionism in acceptance and tolerance, and we rile against ourselves, except maybe with the sense that we've got a more virtuous criteria to judge ourselves against now. So we're not doing the same thing as we were because now it's more virtuous, but the mechanism kind of remains the same. So I think this acknowledging of like the old me is still part of me is, you also made me think of something there, which I hadn't thought of before really, but in going back to the idea you had at the very start of the whole of me, like it's it's not that, as you say, it's not in just identifying the things that you don't want to be a part of you and picking them out. They're a part of me. And so with that, I'd also say that there's something to it where, I don't know, all of you or the whole you or the whole me or the whole anyone is here right now.
Mm-hmm.
It's just whether we're aware of it or not. And so even I think some of our efforts in becoming, they kind of can start off from the basis of us just not accepting or maybe even believing that we are, the whole of us is in existence right now. We just may not be conscious of it. Because like how can you or I not be whole right now? Do you like, or how can we not have the capacity to be whole right now? Like,
Mm-hmm.
are we? Is there a floating part of us just in the ether somewhere that we're
Yeah.
just waiting to?
Just,
Do you know what I mean?
yeah.
This isn't. I'm not deconstructing your perspective. I think this is. I have very similar. Um, I think all, like, we all nearly have these perspectives, but I don't know. That's for the first time I ever really thought, just how could I not be whole right now? How would that be
Mm-hmm.
possible?
It's, it's such a one of the things that comes to mind here, Mark, is the claim that, say, like some cognitive neuroscientists sort of make, and it goes something like, we're intelligent through something like our ability to sort of like disavow the irrelevant and pay attention to the relevant. And John Vervaeke refers to that as recursive relevance realization. There's some really interesting stuff going on in the cognitive sciences around that. But that's part of what I thought of, because at that which we identify with, that which we are aware of, is a very small part of our overall being in this world. Uh, Almost like, regardless of the lens through which we look at what that being is, like, what is Mark? Like, there's so many different ways to describe that. But yeah, that's a fascinating. It's a fascinating, almost curiosity, but also tension. Like, it's curious. You say that, and it's like,
Mm.
yeah, of course. But then there's a tension. It's like, it sounds obvious, but is it true? To what extent? And if I am whole, why do I not feel whole? Why do we talk about this process of wholing? And yeah, there's
Mm.
like, and I'm
Yeah.
probably,
Oh, yeah.
because
Like, it's
yeah.
it's literally a thought. It's just
Mm.
occurred to me now, so it's not. But it does.
Work it out.
It
Work it
does seem to
out. Yeah.
carry. Yeah. No, but I don't know. It just. I think there's something, I don't know, in the last few years where I don't feel as concerned with what I'm becoming,
Mm.
um, or what I'm promising myself that I'm going to become. Because here's what I think it is. I think my experience feels whole, or my engaging with the moment feels whole or enough. And in that, I don't have to have some sense of perfection. It could even be sitting in a room and feeling tension. But if I'm
Mm.
willing to meet that tension, and I don't mean dispel it, confront it, or anything, but if I'm just willing to sit with it,
Mm-hmm.
there seems to be something within that where moments feel whole, and therefore I feel whole. And
Mm.
because otherwise then life would just be because we're always becoming, right? And I mean, in the sense of, we're all like, it's just nature's way to grow and evolve. Like, that's just the way it goes, right? So as we are part of that, it would make I'm obviously going to be different in 10 years' time than I am now in some capacity. So how could I ever find peace? Because there's always something to become, and maybe even in a lot of the way we perceive things, to be better then, right? Like then I
Mm-hmm.
will be better. But then
Mm-hmm.
life would be perpetually unsatisfying then, or something like that.
Yeah, I feel like, because I thought knowing we're recording today, and knowing what your project has been about, and having tuned in to a number of episodes, and knowing the work of many of the people who you have had as guests, I, I I gave some thought to the sort of like, what is a good life question, but also checked myself a little. I don't want to over engineer it, because I have sometimes I've been on podcasts or in situations like this where I have this temptation to give this very elaborate. Now, it might be a really interesting and potentially useful and maybe even really technically valid answer, but I kind of tried to hold back, and I was like, I'm just going to see what feels right. But what you've just said there, like aligns so much to the first answer that kind of came alive within me, and I feel called to sort of just sort of like preemptively answer the question, if that's, I'll give it a crack if that's okay.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So, what is a good life? I'm actually no. I normally do this thing where I provide like a million caveats before I say anything, and I'm going to gift myself the opportunity not to do that. And I know you'll be
Second.
okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think it's something like the way I relate to this question right now, and when I was sitting with the profundity of it, a life where your modes of being, of doing, and becoming exist in healthy, dynamical relation as consistently as possible when you look at the entirety of that life. And just to qualify those terms really quickly, like being is just like mindfully attending to the beauty that is without any desire to change it. Doing is your attempt to protect the beauty that is or add new beauty to the world. And becoming is I would say I most relate to it because I wholesomely agree with you that being evolutionary processes ourselves, we can't help but become, right? But I think there's something maybe special or unique, I'm not sure the right way to frame it, about being not just minded animals but cultured persons, being human persons, where we can actively, where we can self-reflect, where we can express how we want to engage in that active process of becoming, based on things like values and our philosophy and whatnot. And I, yeah, so when I think about what is a good life, I know that's not a practical answer, or it doesn't tell me what to do on a daily basis, but it gives me sort of like a meta scaffold or something. Yeah.
I love that. I Yeah, because at the end of the day, it would be completely disingenuous to me to think that I'm not some sort of active participant in my becoming, or there's no intention, or there's anything like that. Like it would just,
Mm.
whether it's happening or not, whether I'm affecting it or not, that's a different conversation. But it will always
Mm-hmm.
feel like that to me. So I
Mm-hmm.
really, I love the interplay of that, and I must say that I've loved what you've offered in this conversation, and the observations, the experiences, the anecdotes, the feelings, the insights from your own process. I think it's wonderfully relatable and human and connecting. And as I said, like clearly full of insight from a number of circumstances that are very specific to your experience of life. And so, yeah, just to say a huge thank you today for joining us on the What is a Good Life podcast. I've enjoyed it tremendously.
It means a lot, mate. I was super excited about this opportunity, and I've loved every minute. Thank you.